Everyone else passed him by, but the man with the darkest past was the one who chose to carry him. Bradley McKenzie's wheelchair lurched to one side as the front wheel sank into a pool of thick, sucking mud. He gripped the armrests, panic rising in his throat as cold water soaked through his shoes and splattered against his legs. The 9-year-old trembled, not from the storm, but from the realization. He was alone. His caregiver, a woman hired for her credentials more than compassion, stood under a tree 50 feet away, dry, distracted, and still on the phone. "Help!" he called. His voice cracked, drowned by thunder, and ignored by every passing adult. People passed, a jogger in headphones, a woman with a stroller, a man in a suit, all of them glancing and then averting their eyes. No one stopped. No one saw him. Or maybe they chose not to. And then he came. A tall, sharply dressed man in a soaked black suit. Thick dark hair, streaked with silver, plastered to his forehead. Eyes that had seen too much. He didn't shout. He didn't ask. He walked straight into the water. His polished shoes disappeared beneath the rising flood as he knelt in the brown muck and reached for Bradley. Not like a stranger, but like someone who had been searching for him. "Put your arms around my neck," he said, voice low but steady. "I've got you." Bradley didn't ask who he was. He didn't care. Because in the man's voice, there was no fear. No doubt. Only protection. Manfredo Ferrari, the man who once made city councils tremble, carried Bradley on his back like the boy was made of glass. With water up to his thighs and danger in every direction, the Mafia boss didn't blink. He carried him through it all, to the sidewalk, to safety, to the arms of a father who arrived seconds too late. "He carried me through the flood, Dad," Bradley whispered. "Everyone else ran, but he didn't. He saved me." But before we can understand why a man like Manfredo Ferrari would risk everything, his safety, his secrecy, his freedom, to rescue a stranger's child, we need to go back to the day everything changed. Before we begin, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The rain had washed the city clean, but for Manfredo Ferrari, nothing ever washed away completely. He sat in the dark corner of a quiet motel room, his black jacket draped over a wooden chair, a half-empty glass of bourbon catching the light from a flickering lamp. Outside, the streets hissed with the sound of wet tires, but inside there was only silence and memory. The kind of silence that remembered gunfire, whispered deals, and names carved into gravestones. He turned the glass in his hand slowly, watching the amber liquid tremble like it wanted to confess something. Once people said his name the way priests said prayers, softly, carefully, like it might summon something dangerous. Manfredo Ferrari, the man who ran the docks, who controlled half the city's construction money, who could make a problem disappear before sunrise. In his youth, he was called Il Toro, the bull, because once he charged, he didn't stop until someone was broken. His loyalty was absolute, his anger biblical. And yet, for all his power, he could not protect the one person who needed him most. Matteo had been born on a quiet spring morning, with lungs that fought for every breath. Doctor said it was muscular dystrophy, a long, cruel sentence dressed up as a diagnosis. Manfredo remembered the way he'd stood there, towering over the incubator, unable to breathe himself as tiny hands reached toward the glass. For the first time in his life, he had faced an enemy he couldn't threaten, bribe, or kill. So he did the only thing he knew. He tried to buy time. He paid for the best doctors in Milan, then Rome, then America. He funded research labs anonymously, built entire hospital wings under false names. But no matter how much blood or money he offered, Matteo's condition worsened. Every morning, Manfredo watched his boy wake weaker than the day before, his voice smaller, his laughter quieter. And when the infection came, a simple, preventable cold that turned to pneumonia, Manfredo's empire, his pride, his violence, all of it meant nothing. The day Matteo died, the city went silent for him. Not from mourning, but from fear. Manfredo disappeared, leaving lieutenants to guess whether he'd been killed or had chosen exile. Some said he went mad and burned down his own warehouse. Others whispered that he'd killed the doctor who failed to save his son. The truth was simpler and sadder. He just stopped showing up. The man who once ran everything simply walked away. He bought a false passport in Naples, shaved the beard that had become his trademark, and became Manfred Rinaldi, a name as forgettable as a shadow in the rain. He settled on the outskirts of the city, renting a modest apartment that smelled of coffee and old wood. Every morning, he made himself espresso and watched pigeons gather on the roof across the street. The world thought he was dead, and for the first time, he didn't correct it. Death, in many ways, was easier than what he was living. But Tuesdays were different. Tuesdays were the days Matteo had loved the most. Even when his legs could no longer move, Matteo had insisted on feeding the ducks at Riverside Park. He'd laugh as the birds fought over crumbs, his small hands tossing seeds with the precision of a general. After the funeral, Manfredo couldn't bring himself to return there for years. Then one day, without knowing why, he did. And once he went back, he couldn't stop. He sat on the same bench every week, dressed in dark clothes, hat pulled low. No one recognized him, or maybe no one dared to look closely enough. He'd watch the children play, their laughter a mixture of comfort and torture. He'd imagine Matteo among them, chasing pigeons on legs that worked, smiling without pain. Sometimes he'd whisper to the empty air beside him, telling his boy about the ducks, about the people walking by, about how quiet the city felt without him. It was on one of those Tuesdays that he first noticed the boy, a small figure in a red sweater, carefully maneuvering a wheelchair through puddles. His hair was the color of Matteo's when the sun hit it right, light, almost gold. The boy stopped near the pond and tossed pieces of bread with both hands, giggling when the ducks fought over them. For a moment, Manfredo forgot where he was. His breath caught, and something old and aching stirred in his chest. He told himself to look away, to leave, to stop torturing himself with ghosts that weren't his. But he didn't. He sat there until the rain began, until the crowd thinned, until the boy's laughter was the only sound left. Then he saw the wheel slip, saw the panic in the child's eyes as mud swallowed the chair, saw the caregiver, standing dry under a tree, phone to her ear, turn her back, and something inside him snapped. It wasn't instinct, it wasn't heroism, it was memory, the sound of his own son's voice, small and scared, calling out in the dark. Manfredo rose before he even realized it, his shoes already sinking into the flooded path. The mud pulled at him, but he didn't care. His jacket weighed him down like guilt, but he didn't stop. For a man who'd built his life on silence, his heart was making too much noise. When he reached the boy, Bradley's lips were trembling, his fingers white from gripping the wheels. "I can't move," the child whispered. Manfredo crouched low, voice soft but commanding, the way he'd once spoken to Matteo. "Then don't. Let me do the moving." He braced his arms against the chair and pushed, the mud fighting him, the rain blinding him. But even hell gives way to those who've already been there. By the time he lifted Bradley into his arms, his suit was ruined, his back aching, and his past unraveling. He felt the boy's small hands clutch the back of his neck, trusting him without question. "Hold on," he murmured. "Don't let go." The words weren't just for Bradley. They were for himself, for the ghost of his son, for the man he used to be. And for the first time in years, someone listened. Later, when the father arrived, furious, desperate, afraid, Manfredo saw the flash of recognition in his eyes. Jackson McKenzie. The name hit him like a blow to the chest. He remembered courtrooms, testimonies, the headlines that destroyed his family's empire. He remembered the night his brother hung himself in a cell, leaving behind a note that said only one word: Ferrari. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. That night, back in his motel room, Manfredo sat in silence again, the sound of rain tapping against the window like an old song. He poured another drink but didn't touch it. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger's, gray hair, tired eyes, but still dangerous, still alive. He thought about the boy's small arms, the warmth against his shoulders, the way he had clung without fear. In a world that saw him as a monster, one child had held on like he was something else. He picked up the photograph on the table, Matteo at 6 years old, smiling despite the braces on his legs. Behind it, the hospital discharge form with the word infection circled in red. Manfredo folded it carefully and placed it back in the drawer. "You'd have liked him," he said aloud. "The boy. He's got your stubbornness." His voice cracked, and he looked toward the window again, where lightning painted the world in silver. Maybe I was meant to be there. Every Tuesday after that, he returned to the park. Not as the Don, not as the ghost, but as a man trying to remember what it meant to be human. He'd sit on the same bench, bring bread for the ducks, and wait. He told himself it was for Mateo. But deep down, he knew he was waiting for something else, someone else. The boy in the red sweater. He didn't believe in fate, but he believed in moments, rare, brutal, defining moments that rewrote entire lives. The rescue had been one of them. And though he didn't know it yet, that act of instinct, of redemption, had started a chain reaction that neither power nor money could control. The kind that could burn empires down or build families from their ashes. For a man who'd once been feared for his ruthlessness, Manfredo Ferrari was about to learn what true courage looked like, the kind that came not from pulling a trigger, but from opening a heart. And on the next Tuesday, when he saw Bradley again, smiling shyly from across the pond, it was no longer the sound of Mateo's laughter he heard. It was his own heartbeat, steady, strong, and alive. The park didn't feel like a graveyard anymore. It felt like a beginning. A quiet, impossible beginning that even the rain couldn't wash away. The sky had begun to clear by the time Jackson McKenzie reached them, his $1,000 shoes splashing through ankle-deep water as he ran toward the man cradling his son. His mind couldn't catch up to what his eyes were seeing. A Mafia legend, half-drenched and steady, holding his son like he'd done it 100 times. Jackson's breath came in ragged bursts, adrenaline and disbelief crashing into each other. He'd heard the rumors years ago. Manfredo Ferrari had vanished, gone underground after his brother died in prison. But here he was, not behind a gun, not behind a headline, but in a park, with his arms around Bradley. "Give me my son," Jackson said, reaching out, his voice low but sharp. Manfredo didn't flinch, didn't move right away. Instead, he gently lowered Bradley into his father's arms, never breaking eye contact. The weight of old sins passed silently between them. Not in words, but in a look that said, "I remember." Jackson swallowed hard as recognition took hold. His voice softened. "You're Ferrari." The name landed like a bullet in a quiet room. Manfredo's jaw ticked, but he said nothing. He adjusted the cuff of his ruined sleeve, his hands still muddy, and turned to walk away. Bradley, still clinging to his father, twisted to look back. "Dad, that man, he saved me." Jackson nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the figure disappearing into the trees. Long after they got home, after Bradley had changed into dry clothes and the floodwater had been washed from his skin, Jackson remained tense. He stood by the window, watching the rain ease into a soft drizzle, the city lights flickering against glass. His mind wasn't on the storm anymore. It was on a trial 11 years ago, a courtroom filled with reporters, and a man named Marco Ferrari, Manfredo's younger brother. Jackson had been the whistleblower then, the Golden Boy CEO, who'd turned state's evidence in a mob-financed money laundering scandal. Marco had gone to prison, and 3 years later, he died there. Suicide by hanging, they said. Jackson had tried to forget the guilt, the weight of what he'd done, even if he believed it was the right thing. But now, the man who lost a brother was back, and had just carried Jackson's son through a flood like he was made of porcelain. It wasn't gratitude that tangled Jackson's gut. It was something closer to fear. Bradley padded into the living room in pajama pants and socks, his hair damp and eyes wide. "Was that man bad?" he asked. Jackson turned from the window. "Why do you ask?" "Because I felt safe with him," Bradley said, his voice small. "And people usually don't feel safe with bad guys, right?" Jackson didn't know how to explain the world in a way that would make sense to a child who'd just been rescued by a man others used to call a monster. He sat on the couch and patted the cushion beside him. Bradley climbed up, pulling a blanket over his lap. "You remember when we talked about complicated people?" Jackson asked gently. "Like those books you read where the hero sometimes makes mistakes?" Bradley nodded. "Mr. Rotog. Ferrari might be one of those people," Jackson said. "He did something good today, something really good. But his past, it's not simple." Bradley was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I want to thank him. He saved me when nobody else would." The boy's voice trembled on the last words. Jackson turned his head, heart tight. He remembered the headlines calling him brave for turning in the Ferraris. Now he wasn't sure if brave was the right word, or just convenient. "We'll see," Jackson said softly. "Maybe we'll find a way." Upstairs, long after he'd tucked Bradley into bed and kissed his forehead goodnight, Jackson sat alone in his home office, the glow of the computer screen lighting up his face. He typed in the name, Manfredo Ferrari. Dozens of old articles flashed up, some legitimate, some myth. The man had been everywhere and nowhere at once. Construction deals, dockside contracts, bloodshed and backroom handshakes. But all the recent reports stopped the same year Marco died. It was as if Manfredo had simply evaporated. But ghosts didn't carry children out of floods. Jackson opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a file, yellowing, but still intact. Inside were records from the case, testimonies, court transcripts, sealed photos. One of the images showed Marco in cuffs, glancing back as he was led away, and right behind him, hand resting on Marco's shoulder, was Manfredo. The same face that had looked at Jackson hours ago. Older now, but just as hard. Just as haunted. Jackson leaned back in his chair, tension building in his chest. He wasn't sure what troubled him more, the fact that Manfredo had rescued his son, or the feeling that this wasn't over, not even close. Men like Ferrari didn't appear without reason, and they didn't vanish again unless they had something to finish. In his room, Bradley turned under the covers, staring at the ceiling. He clutched his stuffed bear close, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the feel of strong arms around him, the warmth of someone who didn't run away. He didn't know who Manfredo Ferrari used to be. He only knew who he'd been in the rain, the only person who saw him, who stopped, who stayed. And now, all Bradley could think about was finding him again. What would you do if the man who once threatened your family became the one person your child trusted most? Let us know in the comments. Should Jackson reach out to Manfredo or leave the past buried? The first letter was written in red crayon. Bradley didn't have fancy stationery or a proper envelope, just lined paper torn from a school notebook and a heart too full to stay quiet. He sat at the kitchen table, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth, focused on every crooked letter. "Dear Mr. Ferrari," it began. "I don't know your real job, but my dad says you're not someone people write to. I'm writing anyway." He folded the page twice and tucked it into a sandwich bag. After school, with the sky still heavy from a leftover drizzle, Bradley wheeled himself slowly to Riverside Park. The path was drier now, but he still avoided the rut where the chair had sunk that day. When he reached the bench, the one near the pond, the one where Mr. Ferrari had first appeared, he placed the bag under the wooden slats and weighted it down with a smooth river stone. Then he sat quietly for a moment, listening to the ducks and whispering, "Please find it." Bradley didn't tell his father. Jackson had been tense lately, quiet in a way that meant he was thinking too loudly. At night, Bradley would hear the faint clicking of a keyboard long after bedtime. Sometimes he'd tiptoe to the door and catch glimpses of old photos, names in bold headlines, and always the same one, Manfredo Ferrari. But what Jackson couldn't understand, Bradley thought, was that a man who had once been scary could do something kind, and that one moment might matter more than everything else. Every Tuesday after that, Bradley left another letter. Some were long and messy, filled with questions and stories. Others were just drawings. A duck, a muddy boot, a man in a suit carrying a boy on his back. He never got a reply. Weeks passed. The stone he used to weigh the bag down became smooth from rain and touch. He started calling it his Hope Rock. Then, on the fourth Tuesday, there was something waiting for him. The plastic bag had been moved, slightly, like someone had been there. Inside was his newest letter, folded and returned. But on the back, in small, sharp handwriting, were 5 words. "Ghosts don't usually write back, kid, but you got my attention." Bradley's heart thumped so hard it made his fingers tremble. He read it twice, then 3 more times, not trusting it to be real. He looked around the park, half expecting the man to appear again from the trees. But there was only the wind, nudging leaves across the path, like whispered secrets. A smile spread across his face as he whispered, "You're real." That night, Bradley didn't speak at dinner. Not because he was upset, but because his mind was already on the next letter. He wanted to ask about the message, about what kind of ghost wrote notes in such neat but scratchy penmanship. Instead, he finished his vegetables, helped clear the table, and rolled quietly into the living room where his father sat reading the news. "Dad?" he asked, careful. Can ghosts be good guys? Jackson lowered the tablet, brow furrowed. What kind of ghosts? The kind that disappear for a long time, but do something amazing when they come back. Jackson tilted his head. Sounds more like a hero than a ghost. Bradley nodded slowly. Maybe they're both. The next letter was longer. Bradley told him about school, how his classmates still didn't talk much to him since the wheelchair made things awkward, how sometimes teachers spoke louder to him like he couldn't hear. He told him about his mom, who had passed when he was 3, and how his dad tried really hard to smile, even when it was just the two of them. He wrote, "Sometimes I feel invisible, but I didn't with you." And at the end, he drew a tiny stick figure waving beside a bigger one carrying him through the rain. The reply came 2 weeks later, left in the same spot. Kid, I haven't written to anyone in 12 years, not even my own blood. But your letters? They're hard to ignore. Keep 'em coming. If you want. Bradley grinned so hard his cheeks hurt. For days, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Someone out there, someone real, someone scary and sad and strong, was reading his words. The man who saved him wasn't just a shadow anymore. He was listening. He told him about Mateo, how he'd looked up the name after seeing it on an old newspaper clipping on his dad's desk. He didn't say what he'd learned, just that he hoped Mr. Ferrari had someone to talk to now. He didn't expect a reply. But the next week's note had one line. He loved ducks, too. One evening, Jackson came home early and found Bradley slipping a plastic bag into his backpack. What's that? He asked. Bradley froze. Nothing. Just something for the park. Jackson's eyes narrowed. What kind of something? Just drawings. For someone. Bradley tried to smile, but Jackson could see the flush rising in his cheeks. Later that night, Jackson searched his son's room after bedtime. He didn't like doing it, but the knot in his stomach wouldn't go away. Inside Bradley's drawer, beneath his stack of comic books, were 6 letters, all copies in Bradley's handwriting. One of them was dated the same day Jackson had noticed him extra quiet. Another had the words, "Thank you for seeing me," circled in green. Jackson felt his throat tighten. He waited for Bradley to wake up before confronting him. Are you writing to him? He asked, not unkindly, but firmly. Bradley looked down. He wrote back. That hit Jackson like a slap. He what? He wrote back, "Not much, but enough." Bradley, you don't know who that man is, Jackson said, pacing now. He's dangerous. He's done things you can't imagine. But he saved me, Bradley replied, tears threatening. When no one else did. Why does that matter less? Jackson ran a hand through his hair, silent. The kid's logic wasn't wrong. It was just complicated. The next time Bradley went to the park, he didn't leave a letter. Instead, he sat on the bench and waited. An hour passed, then another. He was just about to leave when a voice spoke from behind the tree line. Thought you gave up. Bradley turned. I almost did. Manfredo stepped out slowly, not fully into the path, staying where the shadows of the trees reached out to meet him. He looked tired. Older. Like the rain hadn't stopped inside him even if it had outside. You've got guts, kid, he said, but maybe don't tell your father next time. I already did, Bradley said. He was mad, but he read my letters too. I think he understands more than he says. Manfredo didn't answer right away. His hands were in his coat pockets, shoulders stiff. Finally, he said, Your dad's not wrong to be cautious. Men like me don't usually get second chances. We get warnings. Headlines, graves. Bradley tilted his head. But sometimes, don't you get something else? Manfredo looked at him, that stormy expression softening. Like what? Someone to talk to. Manfredo didn't reply, but he sat on the other end of the bench that day, silent, still, and present. The ducks floated by. The pond rippled quietly, and the ghost who never got mail sat beside the boy who never stopped writing. The letter that started it came 2 days after their brief exchange at the park bench. It wasn't folded neatly or left in a bag this time, just wedged under the same stone, scrawled across the back of a flyer for a pawn shop in uneven, slanted handwriting. Tuesday, 5 p.m., no bench, the path near the bridge. Bradley found it before school and tucked it inside his backpack like it was made of gold. All day, he couldn't stop staring at the clock, counting minutes instead of math problems, words sliding past him like water. He didn't tell his dad. Jackson had grown more careful lately, less angry, more watchful. But Bradley knew one thing. If he mentioned another meeting with Mr. Ferrari, there'd be no meeting at all. So he waited. And when the clock hit 4:45, he asked to be dropped off at the library, his wheels already pointed toward the place where the city held its quiet secrets. The path near the bridge was empty, save for a few squirrels and a jogger who passed without looking up. Bradley rolled slowly, scanning the trees, half worried he'd imagined it all. Then, from beneath the arch of the bridge, a figure stepped into the light. Manfredo Ferrari wasn't in a suit today. He wore a dark coat, collar turned up, and a black cap pulled low. But his posture was unmistakable, upright like a man who forgot how to be small. Bradley stopped a few feet away. "Hi," he said, suddenly unsure if it was enough. Manfredo studied him, then gave the faintest nod. "You came." "You asked," Bradley replied. They walked slowly, neither in a hurry. Manfredo didn't speak at first. He let the sounds of the world fill the space between them. Birds rustling branches, the breeze nudging leaves across pavement, a distant dog barking. Finally, he said, "My boy used to walk this path with me, before the chair, before it all got too hard." His voice didn't crack, but it wasn't smooth either, like he was dragging it through gravel just to get it out. Bradley looked up at him. "What was his name?" "Mateo." "How old was he?" "He would have been 10 last fall." Bradley nodded like that made perfect sense. "I'm 9 3/4, he said. Manfredo let out the ghost of a laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but still means something. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been watching." They stopped near a bench beneath a willow tree, the kind of spot that looks like it remembers everything. Manfredo sat first, resting his arms across his knees, his hands clasped. "I used to bring Mateo here every Tuesday," he said. "He liked feeding the ducks. Said they listened better than people." Bradley smiled. "I think ducks are better at secrets." Manfredo turned toward him then, studying the boy's face with something more than curiosity. "You've got the same eyes," he said softly. "Same quiet when the world gets too loud." Bradley blinked. "Who?" "My son," Manfredo answered. "Mateo." They were quiet again after that. Not uncomfortable silence, just the kind that holds a little too much meaning to fill with noise. Then, cautiously, Bradley asked, "Did Mateo get scared a lot?" Manfredo nodded. "Not of monsters or lightning. He got scared of pity, of being looked at like he was broken instead of just different." Bradley swallowed hard. "I get that." Manfredo's jaw flexed, his gaze falling to the ground. He hated hospitals, hated waiting rooms, but mostly he hated how people talked around him like he wasn't in the room. Bradley looked up. "My teacher does that sometimes." Manfredo didn't speak, but his hand curled into a fist on his knee. It wasn't rage, not the kind that made headlines, but grief, deep and rotted, the kind that settles into bones. "I lost him," he said, barely above a whisper. "I had money, power, control, but I couldn't stop an infection." He looked at Bradley, really looked. "Then I saw you, in that chair, in the rain, and I saw him." Bradley wheeled a little closer, heart pounding like it had somewhere to go. "I'm glad you saw me," he said, "because no one else did." Then he hesitated, fingers twisting in his lap. "Can I call you something, like Uncle Manny?" Manfredo's eyes met his. He didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. A car door slammed in the distance. Then another. Manfredo stiffened immediately, instinct flashing across his face like lightning. Bradley turned his head just in time to see Jackson McKenzie striding across the grass, his steps fast, his expression tight. The air shifted like a storm was about to break again. "What the hell is this?" Jackson demanded, stopping a few feet from the bench. Bradley's eyes widened. "Dad, I asked you a question." Jackson's voice was sharper now, not yelling, but slicing. "You met him here? Alone?" Manfredo stood, calm but unreadable. "I told him not to tell you," he said. Bradley looked between them. "He didn't do anything bad." Jackson's gaze didn't move from the man. "He doesn't need to. He already has." "Jackson," Manfredo said evenly, "let the boy breathe." "You don't get to say my name." Jackson took a step closer. You think saving him wipes the slate clean? Manfredo didn't flinch. I didn't do it for you. The silence that followed was more dangerous than shouting. Bradley looked up at his father, then at Manfredo, confusion tightening his shoulders. Dad, he's not a bad guy, not anymore. Jackson exhaled slowly, the anger cracking just enough to let weariness show. He was never just a guy, Bradley. He was a headline. A ghost with a gun. And now he's sitting on a bench talking to my son. Manfredo looked at Jackson with eyes that held more grief than threat. You think I wanted this? He said. You think I planned to come back and babysit the past? I buried everything, Jackson. Mateo. My brother, my name. But then your son called out in the rain, and I couldn't walk away. Jackson's mouth tightened. You always find the softest places to land. And then you burn them down. I didn't burn this one, Manfredo said, quieter now. Not yet. Bradley's voice cut through before either man could speak again. Can we go home now? Jackson blinked, as if remembering he was supposed to protect, not prosecute. He nodded slowly. Yeah. Let's go. As they turned, Bradley looked back one last time. Manfredo hadn't moved. He just stood there in the shade of the willow, hands in his coat pockets, watching, like he didn't know if he'd ever see the boy again. Like losing him might feel like losing Mateo all over again. If someone reminded you of everything you lost, would you stay close or walk away to protect yourself? Tell us in the comments. Do you think Jackson should give Manfredo another chance? Or is he right to shut the door? The storm between them didn't end that day at the park. It only quieted long enough to breathe. Jackson McKenzie couldn't stop thinking about the look on Manfredo Ferrari's face under that willow tree. Not rage, not defiance, but something worse. Regret. Every night since, Jackson had replayed it, the same thought whispering through his mind. What if he's not the same man anymore? He didn't want to believe it, but the truth was harder to ignore than hate. That's how he found himself back at Riverside Park one evening, waiting on the same bench where it had all begun. Manfredo arrived like he always did. Silent, watchful, carrying the weight of a man who'd already paid 1,000 debts and still owed one more. The two men didn't greet each other, didn't shake hands. They just sat there, divided by half a bench and a lifetime of damage. The ducks floated by, ignorant of the tension. Jackson broke the silence first, his tone even, stripped of the anger that once burned in it. You knew I'd come. I knew you'd try, Manfredo replied, eyes fixed on the pond. Men like you always try to fix things with words. But words don't bring the dead back. His voice was rough but steady, like stone that refused to crack. Jackson nodded slowly. Maybe not. But sometimes they stop the next person from dying. Manfredo's jaw flexed. You talk like a man who knows death. I do. Jackson's gaze hardened. You remember my cousin, don't you? The question landed heavy. For a long time, neither spoke. The sound of wind through the trees was the only thing between them. Then Manfredo said, I remember everything. Jackson inhaled sharply. I knew it was you. You were meant to, Manfredo said quietly. That's the point of revenge. He turned his head then, eyes sharp as broken glass. You took my brother. I took your blood. His voice cracked just once, betraying more than he meant. The difference is, mine died in a cage. Jackson's knuckles tightened against his knee. Your brother died because he laundered money for arms dealers. I didn't make him do that, Manfredo. You testified. Because it was true. The silence that followed was long and suffocating. It was the kind of quiet that forces truth into daylight whether you want it or not. Finally, Jackson whispered, I watched him fall apart in court and I hated every second of it. But you think I wanted him dead? I didn't. Manfredo laughed bitterly. Doesn't matter what you wanted. You lit the match. He turned toward him fully now, the shadows carving deep lines into his face. You know what's funny, Jackson? You thought justice would make you clean, but all it did was make another ghost. Jackson met his gaze evenly. Then we're both haunted. Manfredo looked away again, but this time there was no sharpness in his eyes, just exhaustion. He was my brother, he said softly. All I ever did was protect him. He was reckless, stupid sometimes, but he believed in me. When the verdict came down, he didn't cry. He just said, "Tell Ma I'll be home soon." And I believed him. He took a long breath. When they called to say he hung himself, I didn't believe that either. Jackson felt the weight of it. The grief. The unspoken guilt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know that doesn't fix anything." Manfredo's mouth twitched into a humorless smile. "No, but it's more than I expected from you." He leaned back against the bench, exhaling through his nose. "You know, I thought about killing you once. I even came close. I had the car outside your office. The engine was running. But then your wife came out holding your boy. That stopped me." Jackson turned his head sharply, startled. "You were there?" "Yeah." Manfredo's eyes softened. "Funny thing. I thought I was doing it for my brother, but when I saw your family, I realized I'd already done enough damage for 10 lifetimes. So I drove away." His tone grew quieter, almost introspective. "That was the night I stopped being the Don. I wasn't a man anymore, just noise that hurt people." They sat there for a long while, the sound of the city distant and dull. Jackson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've got a chance to change that," he said finally. "And before you say it, I know you don't believe in second chances, but hear me out." Manfredo gave a tired half smile. "That's usually what people say before they sell you something." Jackson didn't smile back. "Not this time. I'm offering you something different, a way out." Manfredo turned to him, suspicious but curious. "A way out of what?" "The new players in town," Jackson said. "The cartel that's been taking over the docks, the streets, even the clean businesses. They're filling the vacuum you left. Not my problem." "Maybe not," Jackson said evenly, "but it's about to become yours. Because the same men who killed your old accountant last month are using your name to move money again. They're rewriting history, Manfredo, and you're still the villain of their story." Manfredo's face went still, his knuckles whitening. "Who told you that?" "I have contacts," Jackson said, "and a conscience that won't shut up. They're spreading your ghost like a legend. The Ferrari syndicate reborn under new management." Manfredo leaned back slowly, the realization sinking deep. "Using my name," he muttered something in Italian under his breath, sharp and bitter. Then he looked up. "So what do you want from me?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "Testify." Manfredo barked out a humorless laugh. "You're out of your damn mind." "Maybe," Jackson said, unfazed. "But you and I both know these people don't stop until they've swallowed everything. You're the only man alive who can expose them from the inside. And if you do, I'll make sure you walk away clean. Witness protection. New life. No more ghosts." For the first time, Manfredo looked uncertain. His eyes darted toward the pond, where the water caught the last light of sunset. "You think you can buy me with peace?" "No," Jackson said quietly. "I think peace is the only thing you've never had the chance to earn." The older man studied him for a long time, the hard lines of his face softening. "And what makes you think I'd take help from the man who killed my brother?" "Because you already saved my son," Jackson said. That silenced him. Completely. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of traffic in the distance, the world moving on while two men sat trapped in their past. Manfredo looked down, his voice almost a growl. "You don't know what you're asking me to do. Those people, they're not businessmen. They're animals. You betray them, they don't just kill you, they erase you." Jackson nodded. "Then let them erase what's left of Manfredo Ferrari. That man's been dead for years anyway." Manfredo's fingers twitched, a nervous habit of someone who once gave orders that decided fates. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "Convincing people. Maybe that's why you sleep at night." "I don't," Jackson replied. Manfredo smirked faintly. "Didn't think so." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And if I say no, then they'll find you before I do," Jackson said. "And next time, I won't be the one offering you redemption. They'll be offering you a grave." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The air between them felt heavier than words could carry. Finally, Manfredo sighed. Long, tired, defeated. "You're not wrong," he said. "But you're not right either. Redemption doesn't fix the dead. He looked out over the pond, the reflection of the water trembling like the past trying to settle. Still, maybe it can keep someone else alive. Jackson nodded slowly, understanding what wasn't being said. You'll do it then? I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Manfredo rose from the bench, pulling his coat tighter around him. You know, Mackenzie, he said, voice low. If someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd be working with the man I once planned to kill, I'd have laughed in their face. Jackson stood too. And now? Manfredo gave him a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes but didn't feel false either. Now I'm just wondering if maybe ghosts can take second chances too. He started walking toward the shadows under the bridge, the same place he'd vanished before. Jackson watched him go, unsure whether he'd ever see him again, but certain of one thing: the past wasn't done with either of them. Not yet. The first sign was a body in the river. No name, no wallet, just a tattoo across the chest that used to mean loyalty to the old Ferrari syndicate. Manfredo saw the photo in a manila envelope dropped off at his motel door, no return address, no message. But he didn't need one. It was a message in itself. We know what you're planning. Rumors spread fast in the underworld, like blood and water. Some said the ghost of Manfredo Ferrari was still pulling strings. Others whispered he was alive, and worse, talking to feds. The truth was quieter but deadlier. Manfredo had agreed to Jackson's offer, under one condition: his name stayed buried. But secrets like his had sharp edges, and someone had already started bleeding. Jackson's contacts confirmed it by week's end. A cartel runner had been picked up in Brooklyn, muttering about cleaning up ghosts before they talk. And 3 of Manfredo's old safe houses were torched within 48 hours, 2 of them still listed under aliases no one should have known. I told you, Manfredo growled during one of their late-night meets. They've got ears in places we forgot existed. The FBI moved quickly. Jackson's home was placed under quiet surveillance. A plain van sat down the block. His son's school pickup schedule changed. Bradley asked questions Jackson couldn't answer, about why men in suits stood by the door during his chess club meetings. All Jackson could say was, there are some people out there who don't like the truth. But the truth didn't wait. 3 days later, Bradley's wheelchair rolled to a stop in front of the bakery down the block. His new driver, a man with dark eyes and a quiet voice, had insisted they stop for a snack. It wasn't until they reached the alley behind the bakery that Bradley noticed something off. The van door slid shut behind him too fast. The street had gone too quiet. Where are we going? Bradley asked, gripping the wheels tightly. The man didn't answer. Just climbed into the front seat and started driving. The windows were blacked out. The locks clicked shut. Bradley's chest tightened as the city blurred outside, unfamiliar and far too fast. They didn't make it 5 blocks. Manfredo was already waiting. He stood in the middle of the street, arms at his sides, face stone cold. No backup, no badge. Just a pistol in one hand and the weight of too many sins in the other. The van screeched to a halt. Before the driver could reach for anything, Manfredo fired twice, one into the air, the other into the engine block. Smoke poured from the hood as the van ground to silence. Bradley screamed, not from fear of Manfredo, but from everything else. The side door yanked open, and there he was, the man they called a monster. Come here, Manfredo barked. Bradley didn't hesitate. He reached out and was lifted like before, like in the rain. Gun still raised, Manfredo backed into a stairwell, his eyes scanning every rooftop, every alley. The driver inside groaned, bleeding but alive. I know who sent you, Manfredo muttered. Tell them the dead talk louder than they think. Then he vanished into the city like a shadow. Again. The story broke within hours. Not the part about the van, not the part about bullets, but the part that mattered most. Boy rescued again by mysterious stranger. The same man who saved him in the park. Security footage from a deli caught a blurry shot of the rescue. No face, but the posture was enough. People remembered the man in the black suit, the one who carried a disabled boy through a flood. Now, he had done it again, but this time, with gunfire and danger too close to ignore. Speculation exploded overnight. Blogs and news outlets clung to every theory. Was he ex-military? Secret Service? Hey, a guardian angel. Then someone posted a side-by-side image of the blurred deli footage and a photo from 10 years ago. Manfredo Ferrari at a press conference, standing behind his brother in court. The resemblance was undeniable. Jackson's phone rang every hour. The FBI wanted statements. Reporters parked outside their house. Even Bradley's school requested a meeting, citing, quote, security concerns. It all came undone faster than they could contain it. That night, Jackson sat on his front steps while Bradley slept inside, a manila folder in his hands. Inside were 3 photographs, all of the same alley, from different angles. Manfredo, gun drawn, body shielding the boy. In every one, his face was grim, but calm. Like death didn't scare him, like redemption was closer than he'd thought. The door opened behind him. Manfredo stepped out of the shadows, his jacket soaked from a quiet rain no one else had noticed. "You've been seen," Jackson said. "I've always been seen," Manfredo replied. "They just forgot what I looked like." Jackson handed him the folder. "They know now." Manfredo didn't flinch. "They want blood. That's what this is." "Me flipping on them? That's a death sentence." "I thought you knew that already," Jackson said. "I did," Manfredo replied, voice calm. "But now I know what I'm dying for." Jackson nodded slowly. "You don't have to do this." "I do," Manfredo said. "They came for him. For a kid. I've done a lot of terrible things, but I won't let them write that in his story." He looked toward the house. "I owe him more than a rescue. I owe him a world without people like me in it." The next morning, Bradley saw the news. He stared at the screen as anchors discussed theories and timelines. But when Jackson muted the TV, Bradley just said, "That's him." "Are you scared?" Jackson asked. "No," Bradley replied, "because he didn't run." Across the city, people started seeing something new. The once feared name Ferrari was now tangled with images of a man carrying a boy, a man saving a life, not ending one. The story shifted. Some called it redemption, others called it a trick. But for those who'd seen him in the flood, in the fire, and now in the headlines, there was no doubt. Manfredo Ferrari was no longer just a ghost from the past. He was a man who stood in front of death, twice, for a boy who barely knew his name. The decision came quietly, without fanfare or drama, just a nod across a table and a signed document that would change everything. Manfredo Ferrari agreed to testify. It wasn't because he believed in justice. He didn't trust the courts or the men behind them. He'd seen too many verdicts bought with blood and silence. But this was about something else. A boy with a crooked smile and a courage that made even ghosts feel small. For the first time in years, Manfredo wanted to do something that didn't have his name on it. The FBI had chosen an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city as his safe house, iron doors and floodlights guarding every corner. It was meant to be temporary, a place to breathe before the storm of cameras, lawyers, and enemies waiting to tear him apart in court. He didn't mind the isolation. He'd lived in silence for most of his life anyway. But that night, as the wind hissed through broken windows, the quiet felt heavier, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see if a sinner could truly become something else. Manfredo sat at an old wooden desk, pens scratching across paper. 2 envelopes lay side by side, one addressed to Jackson McKenzie, the other to Bradley. His handwriting wasn't steady. Age, guilt, and exhaustion made it shake, but every word was deliberate. He wrote slowly, pausing often as if trying to fit a lifetime into a few pages. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, and for a moment he almost smiled. Fitting, he thought. Every confession deserves a storm. The first letter was for Jackson. He wrote, quote, "You once said ghosts can't have second chances. Maybe you're right. But this isn't about ghosts. It's about the living. I spent half my life breaking men who believed they were untouchable. Turns out, I was just building walls around myself. You tore one down when you came to that park. I hated you for what you did to my brother, but maybe it took losing him to understand what kind of man I'd become. If this goes wrong tomorrow, take care of your son. He's better than either of us ever were. Tell him I said that's not weakness, that's grace." He signed it simply, MF. The second letter took longer. It wasn't because the words were hard to find. They were too easy, too raw. He wrote to Bradley like a man writing to his own child. "Kid, you once told me ducks are good at secrets. You were right. but I'll tell you one of mine anyway. You saved me before I ever saved you. You looked at me and saw a man instead of a monster. Don't ever stop seeing people that way, no matter how ugly the world gets. There's power in kindness, more than I ever found in a gun. Keep your eyes open, and when the world gets too loud, don't forget silence can be brave too. He left the letter unsealed. Somehow, it felt wrong to close it. Hours passed. The clock struck midnight. Manfredo leaned back in the chair, eyes on the ceiling. He thought about Matteo, his little boy, who never got the chance to see 10. He wondered if somewhere, somehow, Matteo had been watching all this time, seeing the man his father was trying to become. And for the first time since Matteo's death, Manfredo whispered a prayer. It wasn't long after that when the first explosion came. The sound tore through the night, glass shattering, metal twisting, alarms howling. Flames raced up the walls like hungry hands, licking through beams and boxes until the entire warehouse glowed orange against the skyline. Manfredo staggered to his feet, choking on smoke, instinct taking over. He grabbed the letters, shoved them inside his jacket, and ran toward the back exit. But the fire was faster. Heat rolled through the air in waves, blistering and relentless. Every escape route was blocked, every door too hot to touch. He stumbled into the main floor, coughing, vision blurred. In the chaos, something caught his eye. The silver glint of his ring, half melted, lying beside the watch Matteo had given him years ago. He knelt, reaching for them, but the flames surged higher. The smoke thickened, black and merciless. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. But they sounded too far away. He thought of Bradley, of the boy's laughter echoing by the pond, of the word uncle hanging unspoken in the air. Then the fire swallowed everything. By dawn, all that remained was a smoldering skeleton of twisted steel and ash. Agents sifted through the wreckage, masks over their faces, cameras flashing. 2 items were found intact, a charred ring engraved with the letter F, and a melted watch frozen at 12:04. The papers nearby were ash. Words turned to smoke before anyone could read them. The official report said the explosion was deliberate, the work of a rival syndicate. When the news broke, Jackson was sitting at the kitchen table with Bradley. The headline on the television read, "Former Mafia Don dies in warehouse fire. Ferrari's second chance ends in flames." Bradley didn't say a word. He just stared, the light of the screen flickering across his face. Jackson muted the volume, waiting for a reaction that never came. Finally, he said softly, "He made his choice, son." Bradley's voice was a whisper. "He promised." Jackson hesitated. "He kept it, in his own way." But even as he said it, his throat burned. For 3 days, Bradley didn't speak. He didn't eat much, didn't watch TV, didn't write any letters. At night, Jackson heard him rustling in bed, awake long after midnight. On the 4th day, Jackson found him sitting by the window with a notebook open on his lap. When he looked closer, he saw that Bradley had written only one line, "Ghosts don't always stay gone." At the funeral service, there was no body, just a closed casket draped in black. No one from the old world came, too many enemies, too many debts. Jackson spoke quietly to the empty air, one hand on the coffin. "You were right," he murmured. "Some things are worth dying for." Bradley slipped his own note into the flowers, folded 3 times, sealed with a piece of tape. It read, "Thank you for the silence. I'll keep it safe." The world moved on. The headlines faded, but the memory stayed. The boy in the rain, the man with the gun, the fire that tried to rewrite their story. And though everyone else believed Manfredo Ferrari was gone forever, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't finished. Because some ghosts, the ones who find forgiveness, never truly burn away. They just change shape, waiting for the right moment to step out of the ashes. Do you believe forgiveness can survive even after death? Or does it need the living to carry it forward? Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think truly happened to Manfredo that night? 3 months had passed since the fire, but in some ways the silence it left behind still crackled in the air. Bradley spoke more now, but never about the letters. Never about the night the sky turned orange and black, or the headlines that called a ghost's final act tragic and redemptive. Jackson kept his grief folded up tight, like a suit too formal to wear. He went back to work, back to boardrooms and briefings, back to pretending things were normal. But the truth clung to him like soot. The man who had saved his son twice had vanished, and no closure, no funeral, no headline could make it sit right. The neighborhood, meanwhile, moved on. The house next door had been empty for years, its shutters peeled and porch sagging. Then one morning, a for sale sign disappeared, and a moving truck arrived without ceremony. Jackson barely noticed. Another faceless transplant, he assumed, someone who wanted a quiet life in a quiet street. He was wrong. Bradley noticed first. Not the glasses, not the gardening tools, or the new tomato plants lining the fence. It was the way the man moved, like the world still owed him a fight, but he'd finally stopped collecting. He wore his coat like armor, even in spring, and walked with a careful strength, measured, as if carrying something heavy inside. Bradley stared through his window, heart beating like a drum in a quiet church. Later that afternoon, while Jackson reviewed emails, Bradley wheeled himself to the edge of the yard. The new neighbor was kneeling in the dirt, tucking green shoots into the earth, like they were something sacred. His hair was shorter, grayer. His beard was gone. But Bradley didn't need a face to know. He didn't need a name. "Uncle Manny?" he asked softly. The man looked up, and for the briefest moment, time folded inward. Manfredo's expression froze. Not in fear, but in something softer, like surprise wrapped in surrender. Then a slow smile curved across his face, unmistakable and real. "Thought I'd try something new," he said, standing. "Like being alive and being here." Bradley didn't move. He was afraid if he blinked, the image would vanish. "You're supposed to be dead," he said, the words spilling out like water from a cracked glass. "I was," Manfredo replied, "but apparently I'm bad at staying that way." They stood like that, one in soil, one in steel, until the front door opened behind them. Jackson stepped out, phone to his ear, gaze landing absently on the two. Then he froze. The phone slipped from his hand. He crossed the yard in 7 long strides, eyes locked onto the man beside his son. Manfredo raised his hands, not in surrender but in peace. "Before you say anything," he said, "I didn't come back to haunt you." Jackson's voice was quiet and sharp. "You burned to death," Manfredo shrugged. "Not quite. Let's call it borrowed flames." The tension between them was electric, history threading every breath. "Why?" Jackson asked. "Why fake your death?" "Because testifying meant death anyway," Manfredo answered. "This way, I got to choose the ending." "And now?" Manfredo glanced at Bradley. "Now I want to choose the beginning." They sat on the back porch, just the two of them, long after the sun dipped below the trees. Bradley had gone inside, eyes wide with a joy he didn't quite know how to name. Jackson poured 2 glasses of scotch without speaking. They clinked their glasses softly. Not a toast, just an agreement. Manfredo sipped and leaned back, breathing in like it was the first time in years. "I had help," he admitted. "A nurse. An old friend in the fire department. We planned it weeks before the trial." "You always did like drama," Jackson muttered. "Guilty," Manfredo said with a faint smile. "But this wasn't for show. I needed the world to stop looking for me. I needed the boy to be safe." Jackson stared into his drink. "Bradley thought you left him." "I didn't," Manfredo said, firm. "But sometimes, staying alive is the only way to stay useful." Jackson looked up. "So what now? You pretend to be someone else? Be the neighbor who bakes cookies?" Manfredo chuckled. "I don't bake. But I grow tomatoes, and I volunteer Tuesdays at the disability center across town." Jackson blinked. "You?" "They needed someone to fix wheelchair lifts," Manfredo said. "Turns out I'm good with my hands, when they're not breaking things." A beat passed. Then they both laughed. Short, startled, but real. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with talk of the mystery man in glasses. Someone said he looked like an actor. Someone else said ex-military. Bradley said nothing. He just waited for the right time. And when Manfredo showed up with a toolbox and quietly repaired the access ramp at the school library, the kids started calling him Mr. M. No one questioned it. Some men just fit where they're needed. At home, Bradley drew pictures again, something he hadn't done since the fire. One showed a bench, a pond, and a man in black carrying a boy through rain. Another had a garden, a smiling man with glasses, and a house with a porch light always on. He left one taped to Manfredo's door. No words, just a duck and a ghost, sitting side by side. Later that week, Manfredo helped him plant sunflowers along the fence line. "I never thought you'd be the one next door," Bradley said, hands dusty. "Me neither," Manfredo replied, "but some things grow where you least expect them." Bradley paused, then asked, "Will you ever leave again?" Manfredo didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Not unless you ask me to." Jackson watched them from the kitchen window, coffee growing cold in his hand. He still didn't trust easily. He wasn't sure he ever would. But sometimes, forgiveness didn't come in grand gestures. It came in new neighbors, in shared fences, in the sound of his son laughing again. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The name on the mailbox read M. Rossi, and it had stayed that way. No more Ferrari, no whispers of empire or blood in the streets, just a quiet name for a quiet man who had learned, finally, to plant things instead of bury them. Neighbors waved now when they saw him, some out of politeness, some out of instinct. But the ones who mattered, Jackson, Bradley, and the kids at the center, they didn't care what the nameplate said. To them, he was Manny. The man who fixed the squeaky gate, without being asked. The man who brought strawberries from his garden in a recycled tin. The man who always crouched when talking to kids in wheelchairs so they didn't have to look up. The man who had once vanished in fire and returned in sunlight. After everything, it was Bradley who insisted they build something together. Not a treehouse or a clubhouse, but a mission. Something that outlived news cycles and old scars. With Jackson's backing and Manfredo's street-smart ingenuity, they started a foundation, Open Roads. Its goal was simple: design, fund, and distribute smart mobility tools to kids like Bradley, the kind of tech that didn't exist when Mateo needed it. They started in the garage, with old wheels and newer dreams. Bradley called it, "My Real Science Fair Project." Jackson handled the logistics, the meetings, the funding. Manfredo handled the wiring, the late-night soldering, the problem-solving no textbook could teach. And Bradley? He handled the why. He was the reason every tool they built had a name, a story, and a purpose. It didn't take long for the local press to find them. A former mogul, a once-feared ghost, and a boy with too much heart for one body. It was a headline waiting to happen, but this time, no one ran. Jackson stood tall in front of the cameras. Bradley spoke clearly. And Manfredo, now Manny, smiled quietly from the back, letting the future speak louder than his past. Their first design, a self-leveling wheelchair that could handle uneven terrain, was dubbed Project Mateo. Bradley insisted on the name. "It's for him too," he said. For all the times he couldn't get to the ducks. Manfredo didn't speak for a full minute after that. Then he placed his hand on Bradley's shoulder and nodded. "He would have loved you." Over the months, Manfredo became something he never thought he could be again. Present. He was there for birthdays, science fairs, even dentist appointments. He didn't hover or try too hard. He just showed up. And sometimes, showing up was everything. Especially for a boy who once believed people would always leave. One afternoon, while helping a young girl install grips on her chair at the center, Manfredo felt a tap on his back. Bradley stood there, hands fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. "Can I ask you something?" Manfredo looked up. "Anything." "Do you want to be my godfather? For real?" The words hung there, trembling in the air between them. Manfredo froze, then nodded once, firm. "I thought I already was," he said. Bradley smiled, relief flooding his face. "Yeah, me too." Jackson heard about it later that night. He didn't cry. He'd done enough of that for a lifetime. But he did step into the hallway, place a hand against the wall, and whisper, "Thank you," to the silence. He didn't know if he was talking to Manfredo, or Mateo, or something bigger than them both. Maybe it didn't matter. That weekend, they all gathered at the center for a small celebration. Kids zoomed down the hallway in their upgraded chairs, laughing. Volunteers passed cupcakes, and Bradley handed out name tags that read "Family Chosen." In the corner, Manfredo knelt beside a boy whose brakes were sticking. Jackson watched from across the room, eyes soft. "Dad?" Bradley asked, tugging his sleeve. "Yeah, bud?" Bradley looked over at Manfredo, then back at his father. "Can someone be family, even if you're not related?" Jackson followed his gaze. watched the way Manfredo gently tightened a bolt on the boy's wheel. "Yes," Jackson said, "especially if they carried you through the flood." Bradley nodded once, as if confirming something he already believed. He didn't say anything else. He just walked over and slipped his hand into Manfredo's, like it had always belonged there. And Manfredo didn't call him son. He didn't have to. He just held his hand. And for a man who once ruled a city through fear, that was enough. More than enough. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.